Okay, so welcome to the first episode of my new talk show about League of Legends. Working title at the moment is going to be Summoning Insight, so we'll see whether that becomes lame or a good name or whatever in the future. On this episode, it's just going to be me and MonteCristo, so I'll give you a brief intro on who we are and what the show is going to be about. So I'm Thorin. I'm a senior content esports editor or some bullshit at On Gamers, and I write lots of articles, do casting in other games, kind of like a lot of different things over the years. MonteCristo is going to be the other main host on this show, and so he's a caster for OGN. You see him doing Champions, doing Masters. He was at Worlds. He did the analysis there. He's the coach of CLG, so again, lots of different hats going on here. So how are you doing, Monty?
I'm doing great. I write articles sometimes too, but I haven't done that in a while.
Sure. Okay, so the basic premise of what I wanted to do when I thought about putting this show together was actually that we discussed in the past that there wasn't really like a full-on talk show for League of Legends. There's like shows like people do podcasts, so they have smaller shows where they either talk about like scene things, like what are the role of journalists, you know, that sort of a scene type thing, or roster moves and stuff like that. But I actually wanted a show where people watch the games from the big regions, and then you talk about topics, but they're going to relate also to the games or key things that go more in depth on the game. And I know a lot of people, maybe the reason they don't do that is because they don't feel so comfortable trying to go in depth and give like an expert opinion or whatever. But luckily you are an expert, and I don't give a fuck if people don't think I'm an expert. So that combination should be allow us to get
It'll be great. It'll be great. It'll be perfect.
So to start things off like that, the reason I set it up is because we won't necessarily just only talk about last week's LCS results or what's coming up this week, but those will inform the kind of overall topic we talk about. So the first topic I wanted to get into, actually, because it's the most interesting in EU LCS right now, is what's going on with fnatic. So the basic premise was fnatic won the first 7 games, and everyone was like, oh, they're amazing, like they're going to be the best team by far. And based on Worlds, it seemed to make sense. You know, they were the best EU team. Now they lost 7 games, and now they've kind of just started to turn it around. So give me how would you characterize where fnatic is right now for you? Like, how do they stack up in EU?
I mean, obviously, they're pretty middle of the road and just extremely streaky. It's difficult for me to say, but it seems like there's a lot of weird internal stuff going on as well, because they seem to have fired their manager, fnatic Rico, his real name is Sammy. And this is really surprising to me, because I gained a lot of respect for fnatic at the World Championship when Sammy was there with the team, because I thought he brought a really good, grounded, like coaching presence, and I actually attributed a lot of success to the way that I saw the team focusing on the games, how mature they were at Worlds, how good of a job I perceived Sammy to be doing in leading team discussions and talking about strategy, just acting as kind of an older, more mature figure and being that grounding focus for the team. So for them to just kind of sack him or whatever happened, I don't even know what happened. He just removed fnatic from his Twitter tag and everybody said he left. But he's confirmed that he's no longer with the organization, is very strange, because I saw their infrastructure at Worlds where they brought in kind of Sammy as a coach and manager, and then they had a highly ranked solo queue players to help them with like lane matchups and new champions while at Worlds and everything. And I thought fnatic did a great job of developing that infrastructure. And then after winning 7 games and then losing 7 games, I'm not sure if there's something going on like behind the scenes that's affecting their ability to concentrate or their morale, or why they would make such a drastic management shift on a losing streak. I mean, it happens sometimes to even good teams. So that's been a bit puzzling from my perspective, and I think it hints at some deeper problems.
I mean, the thing about fnatic is they've always had such a defined style in how they want to play. Okay, at Worlds, they showcased this style that now anyone who didn't watch ETLCS knows, okay, so fnatic, they set up these scenarios with the old vision at least, where you try to catch people out, you go all in the one bush and you catch them, but it sounds like a gimmick, but they were so good at timing and intuitively knowing when to do it, they could get people all the time, okay? So we came into this season with the Season 4 changes, and I think it was on Twitter you said this. You made this statement, okay, that you thought of when you were making different predictions about what would happen this season, okay, so you're saying like you thought Alliance would do well. One of your statements was you said something along the lines of like, I think fnatic will be one of the teams who, I can't remember if you said struggle or they just will be worse in this meta, like their style doesn't fit this meta. What was it along those lines? What were you thinking when you said
yeah. And I mean, basically, this stems from the fact that, like you're saying, fnatic is at their best, I feel, not to say they can't play anything else, but they are at their best when they're playing double assassin compositions or double AP compositions. And that goes all the way back to like the days of Shushei and all this other kind of stuff like he used to do. But interestingly, to take it even further back, at the World Championship, pretty much all the teams that were going there and everybody said this meta at the World Championship, when the Assassin patch hit, and we knew that Assassins were going to be very strong at Worlds, everybody was like, wow, Fnatic's going to do great at Worlds. They got lucky on this patch. This is perfect for them. And lo and behold, they did really well. I think they did really well for more reasons than that, but it certainly didn't help. And like you're saying, they like to play with vision. They like to set up picks. They like pick compositions. Well, guess who else was a pick team at the time? SK Telecom T1 was a pick team. And that's how they got successful in Korea, was because they were so good at creating picks. They folded when they tried to do other compositions. We saw that in the first 2 games of the Champions Summer Final when they tried to play more standard against KT Bullets and they got rolled by Fast Push. But then they switched to a pick composition in Game 3 and they held out on pick comps for the rest of that series and managed to come back from that 2-0 or 0-2 deficit to win 3-2. So they were always very focused on pick compositions. The difference is that SK Telecom no longer plays pick compositions really. Like they really shied away from that in Champions Winter. In fact, they were playing a lot of Siege and like long-range mage compositions and all this other stuff. And they proved pretty much just as adept at doing that. So they're just lucky in an exceptional team with a very good coaching staff. But it was, I think that Fnatic, with their preferred style of play, that having tanky bruisers as talented as Soaz isn't really their forte. And team fighting isn't really their forte. And rotating 4 towers isn't really their forte. They want to catch you out before they take an objective, not have some sort of prolonged siege. So they're a team that values map mobility with teleport and burst. And so when all the Season 4 changes came in and when the metagame started evolving, it just didn't look like a Fnatic game to me.
I mean, if you look at Fnatic, one of the big problems I think they face right now, which is why I suspect they made the coaching change or whatever that happened with the manager, is that one thing they can't do at the moment is change players, because they've got into that situation that sometimes teams with either a lot of resources or history do, where you have all the players you want on the team. And so it's not like you can just go, okay, actually, Yellow Star, you're not playing so good. Like, we'll remove you and bring in some other good support. Like, in theory, there's no one to remove from the team. Like, everyone is either established or they've been playing well in the streak of the 7 games. And so, like, one of the only weaknesses I can think of, okay, is in theory, Soaz isn't so impactful at the top, but even then it plays into what you're saying. Like, that's the meta right now. What's he going to do? He's not going to carry the whole game on like Renekton or something, 1v5, is he? And so when I'm trying to think of what players have been doing it, if we go through the roster a bit and talk about like how they're doing, you give me like your thoughts. Because when we go to, let's start in the mid lane, okay, since it's a mid lane game in Europe, if it does feel like Expeke has to take some of the blame for some of these losses, because I always felt like, unfortunately, Expeke, for how good he is, a very good player, he'll always be rated much higher. Because I noticed in all esports games, fans who are fans of a player take the player's absolute peak level and they try to think of that as that's how he could play every game if it went well, you know. Now, the problem is, for a lot of good players, they're being good is consistency, okay? So their peak level will be close to where they can. But actually, Expeke always seemed to me like a player who's incredible because his peak level could be way higher than even his consistency level. So his streakiness is like built into his play. And so I always felt that's why Fnatic were a bit streaky, because if he's on and then the rest of the team's doing well, they're going to look incredible. Like, wow, they're world beaters, like at Worlds. Like, how could anyone stop them? You know, that he's roaming all over the map. He's killing everyone. He's always the focal point of all the kills in the team fights. But then in the games where he's off, then you see like it starts to break down a bit and they need either really big performances from other people or they can look really, really bad. Like, how do you see the mid lane in that sense for Fnatic?
Well, I just think Expeke is an assassin specialist, and as assassins fell out of style, he could no longer have the same level of impact. And I think that he really hits his peak when he's in that assassin role. When we see him in long-range, more mage-oriented roles, I mean, we saw this from even CLG versus Fnatic from IEM Cologne, where we had an amateur jungler coming in and filling in for CLG while we had our roster kind of up in flux. But Link just absolutely dumped on Expeke with Ziggs versus Expeke's Orianna. I mean, Expeke really wasn't playing up to par on that champion. And part of it was that nobody had really discovered how powerful Ziggs was at the time. And Link and CLG were one of the first ones to kind of hit on how powerful Ziggs was after the changes that were made to him. And so he wasn't used to playing that matchup more than likely. But even so, I mean, he was getting like dove between towers by Link, and like it was pretty crazy. And I thought that Xpeke's performance was really not very good over the course of that series. And yeah, that was a long time ago now. But I mean, since the Fizz or nerf, since the Ahri nerfs, you know, it's not like he doesn't have a number of champions he can use. It's just AP burst is like AP burst assassins are what Xpeke does. And those champions are not good right now.
I mean, this will sound abstract, but I actually want to relate this to in a sense, because when I was thinking about Fnatic as a team, the history, okay, so obviously they had very different players back in Season 2. They just got Soaz, they had Cyanide, they had Xpeke. Those were the two that remained over from Season 1. But actually, if you remember, Season 2 was when Fnatic really struggled during the main part when they still had their old bot lane. And at the time, because of how fans rank things, people didn't used to say Xpeke was the best EU mid. It was all about Frog and it was all about Alex Ich because these were the guys winning the tournaments. Well, if you remember, to draw a point between what you were saying there, Season 2 mid, in Europe especially, was like all mid-mage play, if you remember. The people were playing Karthus. There was all these champions all the time at mid. That's why people like Froggen were the gods of farming, you know, and they were always with, like, is there a correlation between Fnatic being a little bit worse in that period in terms of Xpeke's play, do you think? Was he a bit lower on that? Like, does it tie into the theory, do you think?
I mean, I think it very well might. I think that it's really hard. I mean, we've talked about this in the past, but it's really hard to divorce the level of play in a team sport of one player from the entire team. And I think the thing about Fnatic is in this situation, they're so used to playing a certain style, and they haven't taught themselves or had somebody really challenge them to break them out of this like assassin heavy or teleport heavy style. And they're still struggling with adapting to a more kind of poke or rotational or team fight style, which is incredibly prominent with the top tier champions at the moment. And so like it's very difficult to say, well, you know, Xpeke was, I think, one of the best mids at Worlds because it suited him, right? And it suited his team. He was very good. But it all depends on what the current metagame is and what a certain like player's specialty is. If you look at other team sports and as they evolved, you can have the best running back in the NFL right now, but it means a lot less than having the best quarterback. And that didn't used to be true in the 80s. You know, of course, quarterbacks were always great, but there was a lot more of a running game, you know, back in the day. And so that the team with the good running back was a little more valuable.
Okay, so I have a point to make about another player on their team. So let's go to the bot lane, okay? The bot lane was hyped very much because Yellow Star played so phenomenally at Worlds, and then you had Reckless coming in, and everyone had heard the stories like, oh, he's going to be amazing, he's such a good amateur, remember how he used to play at Fnatic? It seemed like, oh, this is only going to get better. And the first 7 games, it looked like that, you know, they had this insane streak of like all the KDA. It looked like, wow, everything turned out as we expected. But when I've been thinking about one of the problems they have in their bot lane, I did an interview with Mithy recently, and he made this comment where when he was saying about how he thinks a lot of the AD carriers play, he didn't say this directly, but this is what I inferred. They think of AD carry the same way it used to be in Season 3 or Season 2, okay? And they think of it like, oh, my job is like win the lane, like get lots of farm, get huge at the end of the game, I'm going to carry, which isn't really what they used as much for now. And so now
Correct.
people are trying to use the AD carry for more map pressure or push down specific towers. Well, if you think about it, Reckless in the old style is a really good AD carry. Okay, he's going to get tons of farm. He's very rarely going to lose lane. He's going to win 1v1 versus someone. At the end in the team fights, he'll be good. But the problem is, Mithy made the point that he picked Reckless and also Doublelift as well. So it's a good time to bring this up as people who sometimes play that old style too much and they're farming too much, or they're trying to get the double golems too much and they're not thinking about the map pressure principle enough. And the reason why this is interesting is because if you want to look at a problem in the game is if your AD carry isn't focused on like my job is to push these towers down, is to know when I have to push this area and when I have to group, that he can play very, very well on paper. He can get all his farm. He can never be behind, but he's not having the same impact. What do you think about that in a sense as like a general concept? And then if we can relate it to Reckless as well.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, I think that Fnatic overplayed Jinx. I think that most teams fell away from playing Jinx because she is immobile. She's vulnerable in lane, so she lacks that mobility, but also because she takes too long to ramp up. I mean, you'll notice what happened with CLG is like, you know, when we first started running Sivir, I said, look, we have to run Sivir. Sivir is ridiculously broken right now. Her mobility and Doublelift he didn't want to play Sivir. I
Obviously,
said, shut the hell up. You're playing Sivir. And, she doesn't have a lot of a late game. She's difficult to use in a team fight, but her ult is so good. And it synergizes so well with the tops and mids that are working very well in the metagame right now that I said, suck it up. Like, you want to win games, or this is how we're going to win games. And so we started playing a lot more Sivir. But Sivir and Caitlyn are the strong carries right now. And yeah, they are used for rapid rotations and mobility and sieging more so than having a big effect in a team fight. But that is by far the best use of AD carries right now. So yeah, I would say perhaps, I don't know what's going on inside Fnatic, but I would say perhaps they aren't focusing enough on those kind of AD carries, because that's what CLG, I really prompted that switch in CLG to move towards Sivir and Caitlyn, and work on the rotations rather than having Doublelift farm up. And I would totally agree. I listened to your interview with Mythy, and I would totally agree about that mentality with Doublelift, but I don't think we're having that problem anymore. I think that's a problem that we've been well aware of for a long time and have slowly made better and gotten to a place where the rotations with Doublelift are much more decisive now, and he's come to view the game in a very different way. But it was a struggle with Sivir for a while. But sometimes in order to break these habits, you have to put players on champions that are uncomfortable for them. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to put Doublelift on Sivir, was because he couldn't just carry the game, and he had to think more about his rotations, and he had to think more about when to use his ult to help his team in team fights, and he had to be better at communicating when his ult was on or off cooldown and when he was going to use it to help the team engage, which is not something that most AD carries ever have to do, is to think about, unless you're playing Sivir or Ashe, when to help your team engage. So I think that this improved Doublelift's communication with the team overall, not just on Sivir, and changed his mindset about how to play certain AD carries in certain ways. So perhaps Fnatic could do the same thing. I think that Reckless is a really good AD carry player, just like I think Doublelift is a very good AD carry player. However, the reality is League of Legends is in a stage now where no one player can really carry the game. It doesn't matter how good you are. If your comm isn't good and if your rotations aren't good, you will lose, essentially.
Because, when I was trying to think of the roster, because I actually agree with the initial premise I set up there. When I look at the roster, I can't take one player out and go, okay, maybe you could remove him and put another guy in, because I'd have to figure out what would that guy bring. Because in terms of skill, they've got everything, okay? But when I think about how the game is at the moment in the current meta, it makes sense as to why some of those players aren't being so impactful. Because the way it is right now in EU, everyone plays that exact same meta at the top. And so Soaz clearly doesn't like those super tanks at all. So he's not as into it anyway, but he still has the skill where he can play them all and still be fine. So top's going to be fairly even in general, especially because someone like Soaz isn't going to get completely outskilled and outplayed by someone. He's so good at trading, etc.
Meanwhile, it's also in the current top lane meta, it's also extremely hard to outplay someone.
Sure, yeah.
Because it's just like, oh, you have your ult on? Well, I'll put mine on, and then we'll just sit here and keep farming. Like, it's dumb. So
that's what I mean. That in itself is going to make it go even anyway, okay?
Right.
Then at the bot lane, okay, so Fnatic had this super bot lane at the beginning of the split, and everyone's like, wow, they're incredible, they're going to dominate. But actually, the funny thing about EU is the bot lanes in general have been very even in EU, actually. There haven't been ones that are just dumpstering everyone else. It seems like, in fact, most teams just go fairly even in bot lane overall. It's harder for the AD, especially, to just carry even the bot lane and outright impact the map the same way. And so it comes down to the classic EU style that we've always had, which is well, what's going on in mid lane? And so then you see the impact of the junglers is big, and they're winning all the MVP awards every week. Or the support, if he gets really tanky and he can have an effect in team, you can see where the MVP awards are going. This is something interesting people haven't noticed, okay? Last season of Champions, I noticed how many times the MVP for a game would be the support player, where you saw that when Mad Life used to own everyone, okay? Or if Lust Boy played some godlike Lulu game, okay, maybe they could win on support. But it would be very rare that someone like Maffa would have won an MVP in the old KT Bullet B, okay? So you can see how the game meta has changed, which players are having more impact on the game. As it is right now, if you were let's play a hypothetical, okay? I'm making MonteCristo now the coach of Fnatic. Would you change a player? Would you change the way a player plays? Would you change something about the overall do they have to go to a different style that works more than meta? What do you think the quick fix would be for you, the hot fix?
No, there's no quick fix. That's the thing, and it's all about player attitudes as well. Just from talking to Soaz, I know he could be very stubborn about his champion pool. As some, it just depends on the pro player as to how stubborn they are about what they want to play. But sometimes you have to have somebody there who recognizes what is powerful about the game at a certain time and what is broken about a certain team. And you have to be willing to stand up to the players and say, you're not going to keep playing this champion. We're not going to keep playing this way. And you have to be willing to yell at them and tell them that they're not doing the right thing. I don't think that CLG has gotten better for many reasons. Of course, the players have great attitudes. They're working well together. Dexter is here now. There's a lot of reasons why CLG has improved. But one of those reasons is that I sat down in the house and I said, this is how we're going to play the game. And we all sat down in team meetings over 2 weeks and said, this is what CLG is. And we all wrote it all down on a whiteboard. And we said, this is what this team is going to be. And this is how we're going to interact with each other. And we set down all of these precedents for how comms are supposed to work, how calls are supposed to come in, what language is used in comms, what the order of strategic objective taking is, like how we want to play the game. What is the first thing they should think about before a team fight? What is the second thing, third thing as they're setting up? So you have to I had to break it down all very fundamentally because I realized after working with CLG for a long time, and I'm still developing as a coach, but what I realized eventually was that most of the guys on the team didn't understand strategy at a basic level. Like Hotshot, I think, said it best while I was in the house with him, where he was like, they're just all like, they're like animals. They're all operating on animal instinct, but they don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. And so that's why I handed out copies of The Art of War, and we all sat around for hours talking about how The Art of War relates to the game and discussing just strategy that can be applied to any kind of war game and how strategy works and what they should be doing and what their priorities should be. And so we had kind of to reprogram them, and then actually by doing that, it became very clear why the game is being played the way it is today in terms of very fast rotations and the focus on objectives, particularly on towers, because Dragon is not actually very important right now. And I think that this is not the way the game used to be played with all these carries. So it's not just the champions that are strong that are making the way the game is to be the way the game is played right now. It's that it's actually just more perfect strategically from just a general, like, ancient, thousands of years old strategy standpoint. And so I think that any team right now who has a lot of these players who have been around for a long time, you look at Cyanide, Xpeke, Yellow Star, Soaz, these guys have had really long careers in League of Legends, and they have a lot of bad habits that have developed. Habits that once used to be effective, but are now been vastly outstripped by the way the game is played in modern times. The perfect game of League of Legends is a game with 0 kills and 11 towers, right? That's how you want to do it. So I don't think they're used to playing that way, and I think that a lot of teams that have these older players need to really seriously sit down and try and reprogram themselves fundamentally. And sometimes that comes on just like forcing people on certain champions, be like, you're practicing this or we're doing nothing but this in scrims. And you accept the losses in that case. You know, sometimes we have days where at CLG we're like, we suck at this. We're just going to do this today. We need to focus on this objective. We're doing this at this time. And we'll just do it over and over and over again. And sometimes we just lose a bunch of games in a row, but it doesn't matter because we're working on something specific. So that's how I can't tell what Fnatic would have to do because unless I'm in there, I don't know the particular problems. But that was a problem that some problems that CLG had, which are probably very similar to the problems that Fnatic are having, given the fact that they also have a bunch of old school players, and given the fact that, like CLG, they had a bizarre play style that had been totally left behind by more advanced strategic thinking.
No, actually, I can relate that myself to how I think of their team, because when I say the reason I set it up like that, where we went through some of the players in the roster, etc., you'll notice on none of those players, even Soaz or Reckless or whoever, I never said like the option is to remove them, because actually I don't think.
Oh
that's
no,
the problem.
I think they're all very good. Yeah.
So I wouldn't
make any roster changes. Yeah.
Sure. So I mean, the way I think of what their core problem is, getting beyond even just actual one strategy they do wrong, it's like it goes like this. Whenever I think of pro players, a problem in psychology that a lot of pro players in all games have is that their main style of play tends to be based around whatever their natural strength is or whatever the one strength they've worked to build up is. And so the way that they become really amazing in performance in game is they learn to trust that that strength will always be there, and that whatever's happening now, if I just fall back on my ultimate strength, that will somehow get me through the game, whatever difficult situation I'm in now. So when I think of Fnatic with this pick comp style that they used to run, basically they knew even if we're behind in a game, even if we're behind in gold, like stick in there, guys, we'll get the pick at some point, we'll set it up, we'll set up that one bush where we get the start, and that'll roll everything. So they're every time they're in those problem situations and they fall back to that, and now that doesn't work at all, that's when it ruins it. Because first of all, either you have to come up with something new, and that's really, really bad actually for pro players. Pro players, I always tell people, you should be learning how to play the game in practice, and all you do in the actual game is play the game. Like, you have a shot caller who decides things, but the rest of you, your job is to execute. It's not to think up things in the game like, oh, I'm going to do something drastically different now that I never do before. That'll be a really bad approach. Ideally, you want to be able to just fall back again on what you've learned, and that's what your core element is. So the practice element needs to change the core, needs to change the philosophy or what the overall approach or strategy is. And the problem is, it's actually a very famous thing in Europe that Fnatic is like notoriously bad in practice. Like, they just pick champions they won't use, or even worse, they play and then when they're losing, they just sort of give up. Like, who gives a fuck? Like, the LCS is next week, like, we'll win anyway. And so what's funny is when they were on top, the other teams would complain about this. Like, it sucks because we can't get like a proper read on Fnatic because when we practice them, it's different. Well, okay, that's good when you're on top, that you're like a TSM. Okay, you win every tournament, but in practice, you give nothing away. Here's the problem though. When you fall off and you now still suck in practice and you're doing badly in the games, well, where do you improve? The core strength isn't there.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like you're saying, the whole like, let's just not to reduce Fnatic to this, but just to, people like to talk about the Fnatic brush and like hiding in a brush which is legitimately something they did a lot. So, but when they were behind, but that's only one specific answer to being behind, right? The difference is from what CLG has been working on is, instead of like falling back to like hide in a brush, your thinking has to be much more dynamic than that, because otherwise teams are going to get too good of a read on you. So instead, what we implemented was just kind of like a priority list of different actions depending on the time. So it's like, basically in CLG, it's like, is this action, like, what's going on? The players have to talk to each other, and it's improving comms and thought process throughout this. And it was very important with CLG that everybody be on the same page about what the language we were using in these things was. So in the priority list, it's like, you do this, or you think about this, you ask each other, can we do this? If the answer is no, then you're like, okay, the next best thing, like, can we do this? It's not always just like hide in a bush, right? You know what I mean? Like, hide in a bush is only one strategy that it is optimal in certain times if you have to do that, but you can't rely on that every time. And the thinking has to be much more dynamic based on your team composition and based on what's happening in the game at a given period. And so that's why I've tried so hard to set up a framework of playing rather than just like a style of playing, you know what I mean? Or that fallback strategy. You have to break, that's so important, I think, to break people out of that. And I have a funny story. So, I was telling you that like we put double lift on like Sivir and Caitlyn and all this other stuff just to stop him from doing that. And then I yelled at him a bunch. And his teammates talked to him about it too. I mean, everybody was on board getting double lift to stop farming wolves. But I can't say, because I don't want to like breach trust, but here in Korea, one team had a very aggressive AD carry who would constantly die in lane. Okay.
Yeah. I think
and his coach in scrims and solo queue just made him play Kog'Maw. Just Kog'Maw all the time, only Kog'Maw. And the player would just complain and complain and complain because Kog'Maw has no escapes. He's like a long-range siege. And so then the coach would be like, okay, you can play one game of another carry now. And he would play that, and he'd watch him play. And if he was still too aggressive and too risky, he'd be like, nope, more Kog'Maw. And eventually the Kog'Maw cycle resulted in this player improving quite a bit. It's pretty funny.
No, I can see how that is. I mean, what's funny is when we set it up like this, I'm thinking now of some of the lines that could be taken out of context. Okay, so you said earlier on, most pro players actually don't have that much understanding. You're specifically talking about CLG, but I would apply it in general of like, they don't understand, we're not even talking just about game strategy. Okay, they don't understand very, very high level game strategy, a lot of them, but also a lot of them don't understand the meta game theory of how you win, like what wins versus this, or what type of approach counters that, or reduces that or neutralizes that. Well, what's funny is I also said myself a minute ago that players themselves will tend to just stick to the one style, whatever their inherent style is and their strength, fall back on that over and over. Well, actually, once had a discussion with Artosis. I did an interview actually with where he made a point that actually really crystallized this for me, which was I've always hated it where when players are doing really well, people will give them all the credit, okay, but when they're doing badly, the player will always give some very specific subjective reason for that one day as to why he lost, okay. He won't ever say I lost because my style doesn't work or I picked the wrong approach. He'll say like what happened was I lost that one Marine there where if I'd got that, I'd have won that fight. Or he goes, I woke up today, I didn't feel good, I came into the game, I was off. And what's funny is he made the point that in StarCraft, where the metagame was really, really quick because it's an individual game, where your style might be up for 2 months, and then it might have 3 months where it's totally out of the style and you're not as effective. You can still win, but you won't be as effective. He said that in this scenario, the player would never make that connection. They'd never plot their career out there because to the player, he goes practice game by practice game, and he goes game by game. So if he wins the 5 games in the tournament before he reaches the really good opponent that's going to beat him, he's going to think, well, it was working then, my approach was working, and then, before that game, I felt bad, I was nervous, I didn't feel confident. Like, that's why I lost that game. He'll never identify, oh, wait a second, my style was in vogue 2 months ago when I was beating everyone. Now it's sort of out a bit, so either I need to adapt it or it's only going to work again when it comes back in. And that's something I've noticed with the most pro players,
Well, that's what a lot of pro players do too, and like I've kind of tried to hammer it out of the CLG guys. Like their favorite thing to do is like say something like, "Oh, we just lost because of this XYZ small reason."
The Cholster approach.
Yeah, I was like, "What? No, no." I was like, "Okay, you didn't just lose because of that," and they're like, "Oh, we just won't do that again." I'm like, "But that's not the root of the problem." And then we actually like get the voice comm because Riot's very nice, so we can get audio recordings of the voice comm from the LCS matches, and we can sync it up with the VOD and like listen to what's going on. And so we say, I'm like, no, this problem happened because this player didn't give you this piece of information, or this call was wrong, or this call was unclear. That's the thing, is players usually know what's going on. It's the calls that get unclear, like the calls that get muddy. And players are somewhat good at identifying mistakes after the game, but typically on a more micro scale. I think that's where both Hotshot and I have come in really useful, is we can review VODs with the team, and they'll already understand any kind of micro mistakes they made in lane. But it's really helpful for all of us to talk as a team about the macro decisions and how like the play calling should be going. But yeah, it's about, I think that the best teams in the world are the most adaptable, and those are the ones that have a set framework for how they're going to communicate with each other. I have really not focused on building like cute little strategies that subvert the metagame that'll work for, one game. Some teams in the LCS like to do this, but I think it's just much more fundamental to go in and strike at the core of the issue and fix the comms, because the comms are everything to a professional team right now. And I think that really dictates, a lot of the difference between the win and the loss at this stage of League of Legends. It didn't used to. A lot of teams used to be very good with crap comms in League, but the game has evolved to such a state. It's being played at such a high level now that you can't do that anymore.
Because, I mean, like to switch topics, before we go into some of the other regions, I've got a couple of topics there. I thought another good topic we could do in the EU region, because it's so different from the Fnatic problem, is the SK issue. Because SK, when you saw their lineup coming into the season, most people were thinking, right, this is going to be a bottom 4 team. And then even then, who knows, if Wolves are really good, some of these, maybe they could even be like fighting to stay out of relegation. But actually, at the moment, SK is 3rd. And they've had impressive wins. They've beaten big teams. They've beaten teams that on paper have the better players, have the better team, How do you characterize SK for this moment? How do you think of them at the moment?
I think that SK is on the up and up. And just from knowing the players on the team, I think that nRated is a really intelligent guy. And I think that nRated is also very mature and very measured and very thoughtful. And so I would actually credit a lot of the success of SK to the acquisition of nRated, just because, he used to work as an analyst. I know he's got a good mind for the game. I've had conversations in person with him, and his attitude seems really solid as well. And I know there were questions going into the season about his mechanics. He tried out for the super team and for whatever reason didn't make it on there. But I think that he's a pretty standout player. I don't think he's mechanically the best, but I think that what he brings in terms of an attitude and knowledge and shot calling to a team is really solid.
Okay, so this is an interesting point to start because I know we're both fans of nRated. We both think he's like a really can have a big impact on a team.
He can.
If I think back in time, okay, when I was watching lots of the earlier Fnatic stuff, I could see how obviously he was like when they first brought Mykles into the team and everyone saw Mykles doing crazy at IPL 5. Like, first of all, if everyone goes back and watches those games, he was raping everyone on like 2 champions. He wasn't like, it didn't have a massive champion pool. They had him in a very specific position where he had like his strengths and he went to him, okay. But from doing interviews and talking to people, I think a lot of that credit has to go to nRated actually when they first brought Mykles in, because it seems like he came into the team, the star player type character, and nRated was sort of like, okay, here's how you're going to need to play to work in our team in this tournament. And he sort of quickly brought him up to speed. That's why they could so quickly be good. And so to me, I've always like had a lot of respect for nRated in that sense. And then going forwards, okay, when he got kicked out of Fnatic, here's where it gets murky for like how do other players view him and how does the public view him? Because he became the analyst for EG then briefly. Now, when he was the analyst for EG, again, from interviews, from talking to players, it sounds like he actually did them a big favor. If you remember when EG in the summer split, they started out and then they were having this really bad period where they were down at like, I think they were like 7th or 6th or something. They were doing really badly. And then they gradually picked it up and gradually worked their way back up to finish 4th overall. Well, from doing interviews and stuff, the other EG players even told me stuff like, okay, you know, like he fixed our early game. He like helped us figure out like where we had like, we thought we had weaknesses that weren't really weaknesses. They were just like psychological problems that we couldn't get over these issues. So it sounds like analyzing the game, this guy's got a really good mind for the game. And then we come to this period where he's trying out and trying to get back on a team. Okay.
Oh, you skipped when he was the analyst for Lemon Dogs at Worlds.
Okay.
Where even though Lemon Dogs didn't do that well, the level 1s he designed for them were really smart.
No, they got ahead in games. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we then go to the period afterwards where he's trying out for teams, he's trying to get onto different teams, he's going to get on the super team, he's going to do whatever. What's funny is at the time, and I've mentioned this in my interview, so people will see it coming up when like I have interviews with some of these players and they'll mention this. It's not like I'm revealing secrets here. But at the time when he was trying out and there was a bunch of other supports trying out for that position, the rumor that everyone was spreading, all the other players, was like, oh, nRated, he's done. Yeah, he's washed up. He's not good. He'll never be on that team. Like, don't even forget about him. Like, I can see why Fnatic kicked him. Like, it's done with nRated. And at the time, I was like, wow, this sucks because I think, like, okay, maybe mechanically he might be off because he hasn't played for so long, or maybe he has to adapt to the new game. But obviously his mind is there. So I thought to myself, if you can get a player like that in the current meta, how much more ideal to have, like, a player who can be your shot caller to some degree from the support position, and he can sort of analyze the game for you outside of the game, and he can play support pretty decently. He's not good mad life, obviously, but he can play it within his own circle of his skills. He knows what his skill set is, okay? I thought that would be a great fit for so many teams. And so it ends up, he can't get onto the super team, he can't get onto these other teams, he ends up on SK. Well, like you're saying, I think when you look at all the SK players, some of them have had outstanding weeks in the LCS, but I think he's the one person where you can see that he's like elevated the team concept a lot more.
I totally agree. And not every team needs mad life playmaking capabilities out of a support player. If you already have that level of initiation or, you know, kind of playmaking from a different location on the team, you don't have to have that from your support player. And sometimes it's better just to have the more grounded, more macro oriented smart guy to call the rotations on a team, or to call the lane, or to call picks and bans, than it is to have, you know, insane support mechanics. So I don't know. It's I agree with you. I think that nRated was really undervalued after Worlds.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question now. This is the type of show this is going to be, okay? First of all,
right.
For everyone who thinks me and MonteCristo agree on everything, we really don't. And as this show goes on, you will see episodes where we're not going to agree on stuff. Okay, so that's implicit with it, that we can argue, okay? But also, we have to be able to call each other out on stuff. So I know you can't say anything specifically, but do you have any experience of this? Like, I know, for example, that nRated was looking at a lot of different teams. And he was looking at teams in America as well as teams in Europe, etc. Did you get this same sense from how people were talking that I'm getting here, where even though you or I might think he's good or his potential is to be very good, like other players kind of had written him off, or they kind of bought into that thing? Like, just to quickly add this in before I ask the question, it happened in Counter-Strike every time I followed the pro scene that this would happen as well, okay? You'd have a good player, but if he had the wrong 3 months with a team, and then that team told other players, like, yeah, that guy's crap now, like, don't bother with him. And then he played in a trial for another team and he did badly in the one trial, then that team would say he was bad, and then the players played. And unfortunately, whether it was true that he was bad or not, because his peers had lost confidence in him, it'd be very hard for that player to get a good chance again or to get into a top team. He usually had to either quit or go right back down to the bottom and like work his way up by proving his play, you know. Like, what did you get this sense that had happened to nRated over the offseason?
He had a lot of tryouts. I mean, I wanted to give him a tryout for CLG, but he decided not to because he wanted to stay in Europe. So this was before we got Aframu, and I think Aframu is a great fit for CLG. For the record, okay. I think he's doing amazingly with Double Lift right now. But this was before. This was back when Aframu was on Curse and before it was even an option. So basically, you know, I wanted to give nRated a tryout. nRated had several tryouts in Europe, and it took a while for him to land on SK. So I heard rumors that perhaps he wasn't doing so well mechanically at the time, but I had heard that before. I wanted to give him a tryout as well, but for the same reasons you're talking about, I had faith that he was just out of practice, and even though he was never mechanically the most stellar player, he was the kind of player that I wanted on the team for CLG, because I was trying to address deficiencies in shot calling and deficiencies in in-game macro planning, and I thought that he was the right kind of player. As it turns out, and I didn't know this until Aframu was on the team, Aframu actually offers many of those same qualities as well. So,
I mean, just to wrap this topic up, actually, I'll even give it an analogy of another pro player where I saw a similar thing happen. So the same thing actually happened to Cristo, which is that after EG, okay, so when Worlds has happened, he knows, okay, EG is very unlikely going to stay with this lineup. And at the time, no one even knew that EG could go to America as an entire team and get their own franchise there because the whole Velocity deal hadn't been figured out. So at the time, for a lot of the EG players, it was like get in the super team or bust. Like either you get in the super team or you're leaving EG or you're going to be an analyst or something or a caster or whatever, you know. There's lots of options, but if you want to play, then really EG as we knew it, which was the European team, is going to now be the super team, and Froggen's leading that, and he's picking who he wants, you know. So none of them were certain that they'd be able to get onto that or that necessarily they're even being considered. And so Cristo was one of these guys where he's looking around like, what are my options here? Like, I know my rep isn't that good from how EG's finished up there, because everyone used to say like it was Froggen being amazing and the rest had dropped off a bit. And unfortunately for Cristo, first of all, because of the Worlds situation, he hadn't been playing for a few months. He's been doing Worlds, he's been doing casting and stuff. He hasn't had the time to get his mechanics really high. And playing his whole career with Yellow Pete, you're never going to win those MVP awards for support there. You're not going to shine in the same way. He even told me in an interview once, their entire mindset when he was in that bot lane in CLG was like, never take a risk unless it's 100% that we get the kill. Because obviously he can't let Yellow Pete get behind in the lane and be behind in items and stuff. He has to be it where either we go even and then Froggen carries the whole game, or Wicked plays really well, or we have to make sure it's 100% that we can get this kill. So as a result, you're not going to be making Mad Life plays then, showing off mechanics. Right. What you saw after this period in the offseason where, again, he tried out for some teams, or he was looking around the scene and he was figuring out, what am I going to do in my career? He's gone to EG in America and he's in this team now. And you see that he's worked and that maybe that's motivated him. And now his mechanics are at top level again. Like, actually, he looks really good mechanics now. Whenever I've seen him, he's one of the stars of their game. Like, of all the problems they've had, I've thought he's been one of the brightest points, you know. So I just thought I'd relate that as like an example of the same thing where the players lose faith and maybe the player themselves needs that motivation. But if they really were a good player, okay, and they have those core principles, then I think you can always get back there if you really were that good, you know. It depends what kind of situation you're, obviously. You agree?
Yeah, I agree with Cristo. Yeah, I don't know. I think that mechanically it's easy to judge him. I think in terms of what's going on with the shot calling in that team, obviously they're having a lot of issues right now. So it's really hard, though. But from a purely mechanical standpoint, I think he has improved dramatically from the last time we saw him.
So I thought another topic we could go to in this show that would be interesting would be, because I want it to be more than one region in the show. I don't want to, although some shows, if we have a really interesting topic, obviously we'll stick on that. But I thought to take it to another region. So we'll go to the home of MonteCristo here, Korea. Because here's how I'm going to set this up so people are going to like this, okay? So all the MonteCristo haters who are inevitably watching, because the thing is, to be a MonteCristo hater, you have to watch his stuff to find out the stuff that makes you mad, that you're then going to get mad about. If you don't watch it, then it doesn't work, okay? You have to sort of be a secret fan, but also hate him at the same time, okay? He's a villain in that sense.
It's true. So everyone I am the esports villain.
So everyone
This is the
who's
show of
watching-
esports villainy between you and me, Thorin.
No, exactly. And so whoever wants to dislike Monte is going to say, well, you know, that MonteCristo guy, he always says Koreans are the best. He says they've got the best players, the best teams. Everything's the best. They always characterize it right, that you think Koreans have no flaws and all this. Well, here's the perfect example, because a favorite team of you and I for the last year was KT Bullets in 2013. Beautiful style
team.
of play, a great style to watch, and a team you can genuinely root for because players who've never won, they've never had success in OGN, they're doing so well. As a team, they work so well. I mean, outside of SK Telecom, that team could have won like 2 OGNs last year. That's how good they were, and they've won none.
And if they had beaten SK Telecom in the qualifier,
They would have gone to Worlds.
They would have gone to Worlds. Basically, it was between SKT and them to go to Worlds, right?
Sure.
And SKT won 3-1. But if KT had won, I mean, I said before that I tweeted before that
Whoever
qualifier
wins this is
match
going to win
happened,
Worlds.
whoever wins this match is going to win Worlds.
I think you might have been right as well. Like, people will think that's ridiculous because they didn't get to qualify, but it really is. They were that good, okay? In fact, I actually think one of the crimes of SK Telecom's dominance is that it made KT Bullets and Ryu not get any of the credit they deserve for being really, really good, but never being able to win because there's always that team and that player who are just a little bit better, you know? And so to give this topic, the reason I've set it up like this is because we're talking now about how wonderful KTB, Insect, we love you, Ryu. KTB right now is a fucking mess. And they've taken a team where, because of how good I thought they were, when I saw SK Telecom's support is going to have to leave for a while, who knows how long, I immediately thought like, okay, KT Bullets, don't blow this. Just keep the exact same team. You will be the best team in OGN. You will probably win. Like, just hold it together. Of course, like the very next day or something, it was like, KT Bullets to make drastic changes. Kakao moved to KT. I was like, oh God, no, please, why'd you do this? So what were your thoughts when these changes happened, Money?
Grave concern. I mean, to be fair to the KT organization, they haven't technically, I believe, finalized their rosters yet. I think they're just messing around right now. So for all I know, the KT Bullets that shows up at IEM in a couple weeks is going to be Insect in the top lane and Kakao. I don't think that's going to be the case. But it could be still. It could be still. And the KT Arrows are looking great. But what hurts me so badly about the KT Bullets is that, okay, you've got these 3 guys, Ryu, Score, and Mafa, who are the old 3 Star Tail guys, right? And they're like the core of that team. You know, they're the big personalities on that team. They're the bosses. You know, they call the shots, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know. I know that many other players in the past have had like personality conflicts because these 3 guys are like all of a single mind and very tight, and they've been on multiple teams together and all this other stuff. So I don't know if there was some internal personality junk that was going on in the KT Bullets, and maybe they were just all at each other's throats and depressed because they kept like losing to SK Telecom even when they were up 2-0, and they had all these innovative strategies. And I like the Zero going to, like, he was a mid laner for KTA, then he was like a backup support for KTA, and then he became like a jungler for KTB magically. And his first game was awful. Like, and then they were like, nope, well, this isn't going to work. Yeah. And then they did what we all thought they were going to do before they announced Zero. When they announced Kakao moving to A, everybody was like, oh, they're just going to put Insect back in the jungle and put Leper in the top lane. Okay, that sounds great. Let's do that. So they finally did that this last week. KT Bullets did okay against IM number 2 and lost. I forgot to go back and look at that VOD actually, but there's like this really weird Baron leash that happened in that game where like Baron didn't revive or like regen for some reason after IM number 2 like pulled off the Baron, and then it ended up all crazy. It looked like it was maybe bugged or something really strange happened. And they ended up losing, and IM2 played it well, but KT Bullets fell behind, and then Insect gave up a really bad first blood, but then he came back on Eve and was like 4-1-2 after that and was, you know, doing really well, and everything looked okay. Then they put him into the Masters match against IM number 1, and they get absolutely destroyed. Insect goes like 2-12 on Vi. Like, it's just a horrible score, horrible game from the whole team. But what's so perplexing about the KT Bullets, and I'm pretty sure this has nothing to do with Kakao, because I know that the big voices on that team are the old Star Tail guys, right? Is how they used to be so clever. You know, why I loved the KT Bullets, why they were my favorite team to watch in 2013 and why they were so inspirational to me and really changed my thoughts about League of Legends was that they didn't rely on like a specific style. They were so mercurial, and they'd pull out new strategies in the middle of a game that I had never even thought of before, and they would do all this stuff seemingly on the fly, and then they would never do it again. And that's what really got me thinking is like, what are these guys talking about? How have they created a system in their voice communication and their thought process around the game that allows them to be this creative? And so like I kind of like deconstructed it and then like I'm trying to apply what I've thought about to CLG now in terms of, but it's from watching the KT Bullets really that I learned how to do.
Did you find a few key insights?
I mean, I've just my own suppositions,
okay.
right?
Give me the speculation. Come on. I want some theories here. You know, I love hypotheticals, theories.
No, I don't want to give away the CLG secrets.
Okay, well, that's it. Actually, the reason why I like KT Bullets as a topic as well, though, is because it brings up one of the areas that I think Korea is both strong and yet incredibly weak, which is their recruitment philosophy. Because on one hand, they're by far the best region in the entire world. No one's even close to this. At getting solo queue players or players who've never played professional or even like the amateur scene much, and bringing them into a top team and making them amazing. And suddenly we call them superstars and all stars. You know, they're the best by far at doing that, and yet they're also the weirdest in terms of like when they recruit someone to a position, okay, they seem to have a set goal in mind. Like, I want you to do this sort of thing. I think you could play like that. And obviously they must scrim with them before they put them in their matches. But once they put you in a match, Jesus Christ, I thought fans in the West were bad for going too high or low on a player and were best of one. Jesus, Korea is out of control. Yeah. Like if you play one Korean bad match, you can just be, you're out of the team, or even worse, like you're subbed instantly out. Like I think one of the stupidest things Frost has done over the last 2 seasons is say like, okay, guys, we realize there's problems with Rapid Star, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to bring in some mid lane subs and we're going to give them a chance to develop. Oh, did I say develop? I mean, if they do badly one game, Rapid Star's coming back again. You're like, yeah, but Rapid Star isn't going to work in the long term. Yeah, I know that, but I'm just, I have to win this game. Like, it's like, it has to be one way or the other, guys. You have to either take like buy me and put him in for the whole season and let him fail and then go, right, that didn't work. Or you have to say, get a different play. It can't be in between. What do you think on that sense? Because it seems to be a problem they have, right?
Yeah, and I think what's actually funny about this is you'll notice that the teams that did the best in Korea coming up to Worlds are those that were not using subs. Like, it's not, I think that it's not magic that SK Telecom and the KT Bullets were doing so well when they weren't using sub players. And all of the teams that were having like crazy sub issues and like subbing in people and hot swapping them around, like just weren't as good by a long shot compared to SK Telecom and KT Bullets, who coming into the World Championship were clearly the 2 best teams in Korea. So yeah, I agree with that as well, is that I do think it's a little extreme in how rapidly they will change players and not give them a fair shake and not try and fix their problems very actively. But I think that it is a bit of a generalization. I think it just depends on team by team as well. Because if you look at SK Telecom, even though S didn't do great last season, they didn't make any roster changes. You know what I mean? Like they've really stuck by it. And also what's very interesting is if you look at Naj and Shield, they didn't make any roster changes between Champions Summer and Champions Winter, and they got into the semifinals this time, right? And that's like the farthest Shield has gotten in a long time. And I really attribute that to the fact that they kept the same roster that, looked okay. And now I would say Shield is like a top 5 team in Korea. Like they're even better now. Yes, they have Watch now, but that was because Nofei retired, right?
Yeah, sure.
But now they have.
I mean, yeah, it's almost inevitable they would have kept Nofei if he'd stick around. So it's not like they were enforced to bring in Watch there.
Yeah. So, but I think that Shield's a really good example of that kind of roster stability working out. Yeah, KT Bullets subbed in someday like one time or whatever, but it wasn't the same kind of thing you were seeing with the craziness like with Frost's mid laners or like CJ Blaze's AD carries and. Yeah, the CJ organization really likes to do that. But I've come around and I kind of think that I kind of agree with you on that front now as well. But yeah, the Bullets, beautiful team. I loved, and now they're just terrible now after watching their last few games. But what's so mysterious about the Bullets, what I was trying to get into, is that things that I used to see them do, like certain wards and like certain lens timings, it's like everybody on the team is now a shell of their former selves, where no one seems to be doing even the things they used to do individually. And it's like they've like suffered a complete breakdown at this point. And I have no idea what the hell is going on over there. It seems like there's some really severe like internal problems in that team, and maybe the management blew their morale up by making all these roster changes or something like that. But they don't look anything like they used to look, and it's pretty sad.
That's one of the reasons I always get so worried whenever I see a really good team make a roster move. Because even Fnatic, I got so worried when they were bringing in Reckless, like maybe it wouldn't work out, or maybe it'd draw some attention away from other aspects of the team, and suddenly their style wouldn't work. Because the thing is, people don't understand like the impact that one player can have, not even in the sense of his individual play, or even whether the other players in the team are good, but just that the right player puts everyone else in their position by virtue of what he does and what he doesn't do. Okay, so I've seen CS teams where they had the same 4 players before and they were like second best, and then they bring in the one guy. Suddenly that makes one other guy in the team realize, oh wait, right, I should actually just do this instead. And that's what wins the tournament. Okay, it's not the guy you brought in that looks like that's the difference maker. Really, it's what it did to the other players. So initially, I was immediately worried when the KT Bullets move was changed, because on one hand, if they had have instantly put Insec in the jungle and said, okay, well, the reason we did this move, okay, is because we've decided Insec's going to be the permanent jungler. Okay, that kind of justifies it. That's like one of the few exceptions in the world I can think to my problem with roster changes, where it's possible you might have upgraded enough at that one position and taken away some of Insec's problems at top lane that maybe it's worth, like, okay, you might be bad initially, but long term, we can see where this could be really, really good. But the thing that worries me right now is they don't even seem set on whether Insec does stay in the jungle or whether he goes back top. Like, I'm worried that now they kind of do what I was talking about with Fnatic there. Like, they think, okay, well, things are going badly, but Insec was like pretty good as a top lane, so let's put him back at top lane and look for another jungler. Like, what do you think?
I think that the original, to go back to the original KT Bullets roster swap with Insec going to the top lane, and to go back with what you were saying about certain players fill certain roles, Insec was never a spectacular top laner, right? He was very mediocre, yeah, but by Korean top lane standards, which of course are sure. Top lane in Korea is like ridiculous. But Insec would go even in lane most of the time, but what did it? You have to ask, what was his function on that team? It was to be a tanky initiator, which is pretty much all he did in the jungle too. And the problem with Insec's jungling was that even though he was mechanically like crazy and he could carry games on jungle, sometimes he got like way too
he got caught like a
ahead of his teams and like would like run into like fights and crazy crap. And he was a jungler, so he still didn't have as much farm and he still wasn't as tanky. So I can see the logic behind, especially the timing and the metagame at the time, which was all like
he's not
Zac
gonna die
and Shen and top lane. And it was like, oh, well, we could just put Insec up here and give him the farm, and then he can just like go in all he wants, and that's actually going to be really good. And it worked out pretty well. So Insec was more of a role player on that team. He didn't have to be flashy to serve his purpose. You know, what they needed was Ryu and Kakao to have really good synergy with Ryu and Insec so they could get kills in top and mid, and they needed Score and Matha to play safe in the bottom lane. Right, that's how the Bullets played in the laning phase most of the time. And then what was great about the Bullets was they were so adaptable later on in the game, and they had so many different strategies they could call on, and their Baron control was the best in the world, and like all this other stuff that they did. And they would always like sneak Baron on you, because Insect's other talent, besides being really good at initiating, is tooling people around the map. Like, he's got like some sort of weird global taunt where people, like, for some reason, like 3 people will always like chase him around the map in a game. I don't know how he does it, but then he does that, and like his team takes the Baron, and there's something
that's why
about
he's perfect on Mundo, you know.
Yeah, well, and Lee Sin, you know, top lane Lee Sin, like all this other crazy stuff he used to do. And he's done that. He was doing that as a jungler too. Like, you just kind of chase Insec around. But I think they realized that if you put Insec in top lane, well, then our smite can actually be at the Baron. So while Insec is having 3 people chase him around the map, like Kakao can be there with smite at Baron and we can take it, right? So I think that was really smart of them. So the switch back to Insect for jungle, I don't know if that's going to be ideal. And like you're saying, the KT Bullets had a role player there. Sometimes you just need a specific kind of player to fit the synergy of the team and the player to complement the players you already have, instead of just like, so you should be worried. You can't just like, we've seen this like fail in a bunch of sports. Somebody tries to make like a superstar team, and like look at the the New York Yankees every year. They just like throw money at it and hope it works, but it doesn't always work. And then you look at a team like the Oakland A's that doesn't have any money, yet they just play on statistics, and sometimes they end up with really good teams of like not star players. And there's a lot of ways to build a professional team. And we were talking about this a little before the call, but I feel like Rocat's one of those teams right now where it's like, yes, they've got good players, but do they have like that really superstar player? Probably not. But yeah, they're working really well together as a unit,
Like the problem with Rocket's a topic I want to talk about in a future show, because they're still doing well enough that I think it'll be relevant in a future show.
Yeah.
But to give just my little analysis on that, I would describe it like this. This is how I'd characterize the Rocket team. Obviously, there's an unfair advantage where my analogy can't ever be put into practice, which is that they're all Polish and they all like to speak Polish, so they're never really going to join another team, okay? Like, you're not ever going to see Overpow go and join Fnatic if Expeke retires. That's not going to happen, okay? So unfortunately, we're never going to get my theory in practice, but I suspect that since I think the team element and the concepts they come up with on how we're going to play this game and what the strategy is what wins Rock Up the games, I suspect if you did put Overpow onto Alliance now, and you took Jankos and you put him onto SK, and you took Vander and you put him onto Super Hot Crew, I suspect, even though all those teams are worse, so you'd think anyway, I suspect they'd play much worse individually. Like, they would, Overpower would still be good, but I think he'd immediately drop down to a few positions on the mid list. And I think Jankos, again, his ganks aren't going to look so amazing when all of a sudden he's not with that certain team that has the special synergy. Now, people can say that as a general principle, well, that applies to every team. No, that's the thing. Even if you do take Froggen and put him on a team that doesn't really work, a bit like a team that he's on now, he still is really good in certain parts of the game. He's going to have that individual component that will always be there no matter what. And we've seen that with other players. That doesn't I'm not sure that entirely applies to the Rocket guys. That's my sense, at least, anyway. But I hope we'll get into that. We'll have a future show where me and Monte will watch all the Rocket games, and then we'll come on and we'll go ham. And because I bet he's going to disagree with me on some of this, so I want us to just go completely in on it. But I'll tease that for now. So another area to talk about. To finish up the KT Bullets topic, I thought the one thing we should probably say at the end of this is, when I saw the IEM list of the teams invited, I got really scared. Two reasons. One, because I used to think KT Bullets are really good, and I think the old KT would smash that fucking tournament. Whereas now I'm so scared that they're going to do badly. And secondly, I got really worried for my friend MonteCristo, because I thought all these LCS NA only fans who don't watch Korea are just like going to be sat there with their popcorn, and they're going to see KT Bullets like go out in the semi-finals to like Gambit, and they're going to be like, that MonteCristo is so biased. He's always saying, didn't you think the same?
Well, yeah, I saw the list and I was like, oh, KT Bullets are going. And yeah, if we were talking about, August 2013 KT Bullets, I would have been super excited to see them there. Even Champions Winter KT Bullets, even though they were a little bit worse, I would have been super excited to see them there. You're absolutely right. They would have just like probably dominated that tournament top to bottom, no problem. But the thing is, after these roster changes, and what is so hilarious was after it was announced, I tweeted like, well, I'll be interested to see how the KT Bullets do. I wouldn't rank them in the top 8 of teams in Korea right now, which is just honest. I mean, I've casted all their games so far in Masters. They've looked terrible. They've looked terrible overall, and just like a shadow of their former selves. And all these tweets started coming in and saying, oh, already making excuses, for when Korea loses. I'm like, no, I'm just trying to be honest about where I think this team's power level is at IEM. Like, I just don't think they're that good right now. Unfortunately, I don't want to say it. Hurts me to say that. We talked about this. These guys are like my favorite team. And like to see them now, they're not, now they're just, everything that I liked about them is gone now, it appears. Maybe they'll get their shit together by the time IEM rolls around. I don't know. But they are just not looking good at the moment. So I think it depends on how hard they train over the next couple of weeks and if they can rekindle that spark. But I mean, I don't have a lot of hopes right now. I don't think they're going to win IEM.
I mean, unfortunately, because of Ozone doing so badly, people are going to think that that's like a general trend. But in general, Koreans actually usually get a bit of a boost when they go to other regions. Like they tend to play a bit better than you'd even think. Like I think of the old CG Enters that had Insec. They did better than I thought they would.
Oh yeah, they
That
did way
incredible
better.
miracle when they won that Brazilian one. Where admittedly there weren't a lot of good teams, but even so,
Also,
they were a lot
also
way ahead of the Polish players. You know.
IEM Cologne, where the Reaper's team with SK
Yeah,
Telecom,
exactly, yeah.
SK Telecom picked up Eat Sleep Game, an amateur team, like a week before IEM Cologne.
Something
They
like that,
announced
yeah.
them as SK Telecom. SK Telecom rolls into that tournament last year with one of the worst professional mid laners I've ever seen in Mightily, and Reaper like hard carries out of the top lane and like they trash that tournament and win it. I was really surprised. So maybe we'll see the same thing from the KT Bullets here. If they can improve. I mean, we know they still have 4 of their same players, so theoretically, they should be okay. But we've seen, and they changed in 1 week to have Insect over the jungle again. But I don't know if what champions Insect's going to be able to train up in 2 weeks. The champion pool that he used to use is not really good anymore. I don't know. I don't have a lot of hope for them, unfortunately. And it just breaks my heart because I feel like every time we see the KT Bullets compete internationally, it's like the last time we saw it was at MLG Dallas at the beginning of 2013 when they had a really good series versus Gambit. That was a great best
Yeah, it
of
was a great
3.
match.
It was a great match. And KT Bullets very narrowly won that. And that was right after they had made a roster change where they had gotten Insec onto the KT Bullets. And I wish we had been able to see the KT Bullets compete at their peak. But I don't know how they're going to do. I like I said, I don't rank the Bullets in the top 8 in Korea right now. And I mean, yeah, that's it. Like, I don't think they're going to win.
Because that's the thing is like I would have said to people, like because of the factor I've mentioned there, I still think they could do well. It's not that it is impossible, but I also think that the low end of what can happen is lower than people would imagine you or I would think. Like put it this way, I wouldn't say it's inconceivable if they play Cloud9 that Cloud9 beats them. Like I think Cloud9 as a team is good enough that would be a pretty even matchup. Well, actually, that'd be a bit unfair. I should probably put it a bit in Cloud9's favor just because I haven't seen this KT Bullets team play, okay? But I mean, if that happens, everyone would melt down on Reddit and be like, oh, you guys know nothing. You said the Koreans were the best. Like, no, that could happen, okay? That's not inconceivable, you know?
I do think that is less likely to happen. I think that Cloud9's laning phase is still quite weak, and I think that you are not going to outlane the KT Bullets if you're Cloud9. That's my opinion. We'll see how it works out. I'm excited. That's another thing. I'm excited to see how Cloud9 does in some actual legitimate international competition since Worlds, because I don't consider Battle of the Atlantic in the off season of any kind of indication of any team's strength.
And they got
on
crushed
the
at
global
IEM
stage.
Cologne.
Huh?
And they got crushed at IEM Cologne.
Oh, yeah.
So not much needs to be said there. Okay, so the last topic I have for us to talk about today is going to be to switch to China, because there's 2 teams here, and we haven't seen a lot of them, so we can't go super in depth. But the 2 teams I wanted to talk about, okay, is EDG, the super team of China, because they're the one that in potential, you know, we've been waiting for a Chinese team that could maybe go back to the top of the world, and that's like, it seems like they're the one. And then World Elite, just because World Elite's going to be at the IEM, so it seems like a good topic to talk about. The new rebuilt World Elite that only has 2 players, Chao Mei and Wei Zhao. So let's talk about EDG first. Before that team was announced, did you have a similar sense to me, which was like, I just kept looking at China and all I would think was like, China, can you get your shit together? You've got so
Yes.
many fucking good players. And yet I'm looking at your rosters after Royal Club like blew apart and after Tabe and
all
all
the
those
teams
left
blew
and
apart
after
and all
OMG. And I'm just thinking like, you guys don't have one elite team and yet you should have like 3 elite teams, you know?
Yes.
Did you have a
Yes.
similar sense when they were putting these
Oh
teams
yeah,
together?
absolutely. I was saying like people were like, what do you think about China? Well, and I casted at WCG in China, and I saw Blaze win WCG without losing a game and absolutely destroy OMG, and that was the super powered OMG where they pulled their bot lane and replaced it with Positive Energy's bot lane of Name and Sika, who are considered like the best bot lane in China. So like theoretically, like this was the best team that China could have made.
Yeah.
And they intentionally did this because they wanted to win WCG. And then Blaze just pooped on them, right? So I was a little like, I don't know. I think China's very weird. I think China still plays its own meta game from the LPL games that I've watched. They still underward dramatically during the laning phase. They play like weird 5-man roam still. Like they refuse to split push most games for no reason at all. Like I think their macro strategy is still lacking. But individually, first off, their team fights are really impressive.
Yeah.
Their team fight is amazing. And their laning phase is amazing, but they're so focused on like being good at team fights that they don't understand when not to team fight. Like it's kind of strange to watch them play. It's a very surreal experience. Like if you watch every other region in the world, like the Chinese are like way out there, like doing their own thing. It gets really crazy. But I think they will do better in the current meta. The other thing is that at Worlds, the meta really didn't suit the Chinese playstyle. Now we're in much more of a team fighting playstyle, so I think the Chinese have a better chance to do better on the international stage. That we've moved away from like heavy assassins and split push and all that craziness. There's not hardly any split push at all anymore, even in the West.
So even though EDG, when they got labeled as this super team, it was labeled again. I've noticed that all these super teams, because they always start out with the sexy super team roster, and then a couple of names get left off. We all still keep calling them super teams, and most of them aren't. So I'm not sure they quite live up to the super team thing of when we thought they were going to have cool at the mid lane and all that. Like, but for me, I buy the hype. Okay, I really do think that that's the team of all the Chinese ones that can be the top elite team.
Yes, I agree, and there are several reasons I agree with that. First off, they got Name, who's insanely good. Second off, Fizif is a great support player, and he's mechanically an extremely good player at hitting skill shots, and he's always been impressive. And then Clearlove has been on again, off again, the best jungler in China. So they've got a lot going for them. But the other thing that gives me a lot of confidence is the fact that they have the coach from World Elite, Aaron, who has previously shown that he can manage a team up to world level, back when World Elite was just dumping on everybody for a while at the beginning of like late 2012 and early 2013.
Wasn't he involved in like analysis as well as something?
Yeah, he coaches and does analysis for World Elite. Okay. And he like broke off and allegedly took Fizif and Clearlove from W. There's a whole scandal, from what I understand, in the Chinese community about him like absconding with the players, like putting him in a big sack and putting him over his shoulder and then running away into the night. But I think he's got a really good mind for the game from the way that World Elite used to play. And so and he's got experience. So I have a lot of faith in that as well. And from watching the team, you know, their first game against IG was kind of rough, but they really pulled it back and then made smart decisions. Like their early game rotations were kind of poor, but their late game decisions were pretty good. And they've seemed just to get better and better and better from there. It's going to be really interesting to see EDG and OMG and EDG and World Elite play each other, because the only thing that EDG has done so far is beat Royal and who have they played? IG and I'm blanking. I have to look it up.
I'll look it up for you now quickly.
Actually,
let me see
on my screen right now.
They played LGD.
Oh, LGD. That's right.
They
lost one game to them. So I'm looking forward to seeing them play, because IG is really streaky right now. They looked good in the preseason, but looked kind of like they didn't know how to close out the game so far in LPL. And it's just like World Elite, OMG, and EDG are like pretty clearly tops right now from the first 2 weeks of LPL. And so the fact that we haven't seen these teams play each other yet is interesting. Because
I mean,
both OMG and WE, they've both played Positive Energy and Royal, and these were teams that got kind of strip-mined of their talent in the offseason. Because like Godlike is now in America on LMQ, and then like a bunch of people retired from Royal, and Uzi moved to mid, and then Name and Sika left Positive Energy, and it just kind of all got destroyed, broken into a million pieces.
Yeah, the thing is, I didn't get too worried about the IG match, the first game, because first of all, it was the first game, and also IG has always been like I won't say criminally underrated because they weren't actually good enough to be criminally underrated. They've always been slightly underrated. I always think of them as like the gatekeepers in the Chinese scene, like because they always keep the same lineup pretty much, and a bunch of their players can be very good. PDD, Zitai, Illusion, even the jungler. Like they have players who can be very good, and because they always keep the same lineup, it's not like they get super good or super bad. They always stay similar level, and so usually they're like a gatekeeper team where you have to beat them to prove you're the best team, but they can beat you if you play badly. So the thing now I wonder about, so we talked about EDG, World Elite are going to this IEM event, okay. Now, first of all, when people first saw this lineup, it's very hard for us Westerners who don't know most of the players in the lineup to know what to make of them at all, okay, because we don't have a deep enough knowledge of like the 30th best player in China to know, is that like a rising star who they've picked up? Is that someone who was warranted, you know? What is your sense of World Elite now? Because I think that like, I didn't have such high expectations for them, but they've already exceeded my expectation just from the initial games, you know. I didn't think they were going to be as good as they are now.
I agree with you. I think that World Elite making drastic changes was good for them. I have always been kind of like a Chow Mei doubter. Like I've never really liked
understandably
his play
so.
I kind of see him as like Chinese hotshot, where he just plays a tank and split pushes all day, and you know, like I see them as very like similar kind of players, and I don't know. He just like gives up first blood way too much, and he's just really suspect in my mind. But Wei Zhao, of course, is excellent, and the other players they've picked up, the synergy already seems to be there, which is exciting, very exciting for them. And people may not know, but the WE organization is one of the oldest Chinese esports teams, and they were big back in Warcraft 3 with Sky, and so I know the team quite well. So I imagine they've got some old school management in place that's helping them out, even though they lost their primary coach, League of Legends coach in Aaron. So I've been impressed so far, tentatively impressed. I think that they probably have a strong chance to win IEM in their current condition if they can keep it up.
I mean, there's definitely no scouting information. Pretty much anyone can get them at the moment. That's another factor they have, that even if you watch the games they've played at LPL, there's no way to get information on the other players that are the new players. That's the thing. Like, no one can really know their tendencies. So I think they have a big advantage there. And plus, again, actually, it's similar with Chinese teams. Chinese teams also always get a bump when they go to the international tournaments. I mean, people wouldn't have expected IG to even be decent at the Worlds for Season 2. They were pretty good. They had to play like a Moscow 5. Like, you can't expect much more than the round of 8 finish they did. But again, all these teams get a little bump, you notice, when they go to the international tournaments. And I think part of that's just because when you play people regionally, their styles as a generalization tend to be closer to yours, and they know you with familiar. And so that's what evens up a lot of the gap, you know. I have to say,
like you're saying, it's easy to get a read on the other teams. The other teams have been in leagues for quite some time right now. Masters has been going on for Koreans. You've got Champions Winter and, you know, the upcoming season to look at. There's been pretty much no downtime for the teams in Korea because Masters existed. We didn't have, like, because theoretically right now, if Masters wasn't here, you wouldn't be seeing anything about the Korean teams, right, that were going. You wouldn't have seen the KT Bullets at all, you know, coming in since Champions Winter ended. But everybody else has a lot of information. You know, going in with World Elite, you've got 6 games of them only by the time this tournament starts. And some of those games are going to be on older patches that are not relevant anymore. So how do you get a read on this team? I don't think you can, really.
Because the thing is, as well, the main strength for me, obviously, is that they have Wei Zhao still. Because I have to say, I'll just say up front now for anyone who's going to watch this show in future episodes, like, yeah, I'm a total Wei Zhao fanboy. Like, I think the guy's fucking amazing. But part of the reason why I always want to bring him up as well is because I think in the context of the history of League of Legends, that unfortunately he's always got a bit shortchanged, I think. Because when he was very good in Season 2, before they became like the World Elite that were on top, his team wasn't doing well enough for people to really notice him that much. He was a top player, but no one really thought of Chinese teams as elite level teams at the time. Then you have when World Elite does go on top and they win RPL 5 and then everything domestically for like 4 or 5 months or something. Most people don't give a fuck about China. They didn't watch LPL then. They didn't see him doing all that stuff. And so he had a period where he was probably the best player in League of Legends, but I don't think he ever got as much in his period credit as like a Faker does now or a player who did before in Season 1. He was like the guy who got missed out a bit on his credit for when he was really in his peak, you know. And so you go into the later period now, coming end of last year, coming into now, Okay, yeah, his team was doing much worse. I'll credit that he wasn't the same beast. I mean, admittedly, he's a fucking AD carry in season 3. Like, what do you want? He's not going to be like season 2, is he? Like, let's get real, guys. But even so, okay, yeah, we have to credit Uzi rose up, Name rose up. These guys, just these guys getting closer to you or even exceeding you is going to make you not look as incredible on your own. But I think that's a player where, talking like the nRated example before, if you just let him have the right conditions, he'll get back to the peak level of the best he can perform. And I really think he can be like a top 10 player in the world, top 5 player in the world, if the right circumstances are there for him. I still think it's possible.
And I think it as good as Messiah was in season 2, Messiah was a big reason why World Elite fell off. He just, as a player, fell off so hard, before his retirement. And like his champion pool was so strange. And
his champion pool really suffered.
Like that crazy boots mobility Scion shit that he was doing. Like, I don't even know what they were thinking, but he was like one of those farm mages in mid lane, like the great farm mages of season 2. Like Froggen, Froggen adapted much better than Messiah did, but Froggen was another one, right? Where they just like to farm up and then, get all the CS, take all the wraiths, and then, own you with like a 600 AP. And like that just doesn't work anymore. So he never really adapted, and then he just like really suffered. He just fell off, and he was great in his prime, but had some issues, towards the end of his career. And I think that held down World Elite pretty significantly because it super limited the strategies that they could do. Like they were so easily readable by the end of the last season of LPL. So
that's like the way I think of the downfall of World Elite as well. Because the one moment I was always waiting for in 2013 was like, please, just let me see this World Elite lineup before it breaks up. I just want to see them versus international teams. Please, can I just have that? And I never fucking got it. They went to that like IEM where it was only like Chinese teams who even went. So they had to play all the same teams, IG and all them. Then they went to World Cyber Games. Of course, they get on the wrong side of the fucking bracket to play anyone Korean or anything because they lose to OMG. I'm like, why? So I never got to see, because I suspect, I may be wrong on this, obviously, I really suspect, okay, domestically, World Elite was kind of getting beaten and they'd been figured out. But I really suspect if we could have seen that World Elite lineup, even the old one that was a bit washed up, play versus like American teams or EU teams, I think they would have done way better than people think. Like to give the example of how I characterized it before, okay, so Uzi and Name rose up and they were either better or equal to Wei Zhao, what he could be. Well, that means that one of your biggest strengths in the whole team is either neutralized or losing slightly. Well, then go to the mid lane, okay. Even the one team who don't have the beast AD carry is OMG. Well, now Cool is like shitting all over Messiah. So now you're getting raped in the mid lane as well. And they have the great support at one point when they have Loveland down there. And they have the jungler. These are also like the jungle's positions, the one that's always been a bit for World Elite. So you can see how matchup-wise, the teams that are beating them, it makes sense that they're beating them. Okay, the strengths are in the right places. But come on, if we'd have put the World Elite bot lane, even this last one, versus like, I mean, let me think. I'd have even liked to see them versus Fnatic when they had Pushu or something. Put them versus any of these teams, and I think they'd have a real strength they could play from. They could have done a lot better than you think.
Well, and this is coming just to add on to your theory, because I think that you're right. In terms of Chinese bot lanes, you look at LMQ these days, and LMQ spends most of their time scrimming the NA LCS teams, right? Like they're a good scrim partner, and we scrim them on CLG a lot. I see a lot of these scrims, and I talked to Double Lift and Afro after the games, and the way they talk about the bot lane, and especially Vasily, the AD carry from LMQ, Double Lift says he learns more from playing against Vasily than he learns from any other AD carry that he can play against in scrims in North America. And you have to remember too, Vasily is not even like top tier Chinese AD carry, right? Like the top Chinese AD carries are even more ridiculous than these guys are. So I think that your theory is likely accurate, just given the way that these guys learned how to play in China. They were playing against some of these players and are inferior, and now they come over, and I hear how highly Double Lift and Afrobu speak of their lane.
I mean, I think of to give a quick analogy, I think of the way people put down Wei Zhao last year is like the way they put down Froggen. And it's like, yeah, okay, Froggen, maybe his level has fallen off a bit because his champion pool wasn't the same and his team isn't doing as well, but he's playing in the region that has all the best players at his position. So if he's even doing fourth best, he's probably still a pretty good mid, Same way, if you're Wei Zhao and you're the third best AD carry in China, yeah, that's where all the AD carries are, guys. Like, you're probably still really good. But again, if the people even at your position are outperforming you, then it's hard to have an impact on the game. Okay, so in general, I think we've got to a lot of topics this show. Do you have any final thoughts you want to leave people with, Monte?
I love this show. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to many more with you, Mr. Shields.
Okay, for future shows, we will have times where we have guests. We had originally, I won't throw anyone under the bus, planned to have a third host. So there would have been more interaction between the three. I think it still worked pretty well because me and Monte, we can talk forever about League of Legends. We will have shows where we have some guests on, and I'll see if I'm going to do a third person. But for now, I kind of like the format, and so this is going to be the end of the opening show. We'll see if the name's the same next time. Let's sign out. Goodbye, guys.
Bye.